A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
We often talk about how times are changing, and so is the landscape for Christians around the world. You know, for the first time in the history of the world, more than 50% of the world's population lives in cities. And at the start of 2025, we might be wondering how healthy the Christian church in Australia is and whether we are fulfilling our biblical mandate to make disciples. Well, an opportunity today to check the pulse of things like evangelism and expansion efforts, like the planting of churches in Australia. Julianne Laird is the Director of Missional Engagement for City to City Australia. She's spent 2 decades fostering gospel movements, including the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students. She's been the chair of Lausanne, Australia for the past 12 years, and she has served as Victorian Coordinator for Arrow Leadership for the past 14 years. Julianne, a special welcome along to 2020.
Thank you. Really great to be invited.
Julianne, just a little about you for a few moments here, as I've mentioned some of those things. What stands out to me, of course, your role there with City to City and the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students. Some will be familiar with the Lausanne movement, which has been very significant globally. Out of all of those different pursuits, which one stands out to you? I mean, you've been involved in all of these. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think all of them contribute to evangelism. And so that's been my heart for many, many years, is how do we really do that well? Like, how do we actually really help people who aren't Christians actually really be drawn to Jesus? And so each of them, that's partly why I've connected with each of them, is really just helping contribute towards that. So.
And you've been in these leadership roles. Do you describe yourself as an evangelist, or are you really the person behind the scenes, the mover, the shaker? How do you describe yourself?
I call myself a try-hard. So
Yep.
I just try to help evangelism go well, and I just really try all different ways of trying to enable people be confident in speaking about their faith, but also organizations that we keep that evangelistic edge. So,
I think there'll be lots of us who might say we're just a try-hard in all of the things that we are pursuing because, life is sometimes complex, sometimes hard, and we recognise that there is a great mission, a co-mission, and we're all a part of being, involved in the things that we're gifted for. And in some sense, we're all try-hards. Some we might be thinking are more successful than others. But you know what? Let's talk about evangelism, because this is one of those topics. Some people love it and some people don't. But evangelism, we've got to expand that, haven't we, to being more than just winning a soul or just winning a new convert. It all comes down to, this great commission, which is about discipleship. Give us your impressions here about how we think about evangelism.
Well, the Bible doesn't actually talk about evangelism.
Okay, right.
As in, the word's not used. Evangelist is used, and how it's translated in the Bible is good news. And so I just feel like, that's sort of an easy thing. We're just talking about what the good news that Jesus is for us. So we're witnesses in that. We, just are friends with people and show what it looks like to live for Jesus. And, we just really think about how culturally we can do this better. So, I just think it's sort of fairly easy, but I think we're in a bit of a stuck position at the moment.
The more academic you get about it, the more complicated it gets. I like your position there, saying, we're all witnesses.
Yeah.
But some might be gifted evangelists. But as being all witnesses, we're then, let me get your impression here, we're all a part of a discipleship process somewhere?
Yeah, that's right. Because even if you're a gifted evangelist and you might be an itinerant preacher or you might have the gift of evangelism, although not many people in Australia think they have the gift of evangelism, which is pretty interesting, in that we haven't done much work, because it used to be that we would train up gifted evangelists for preaching and itinerant ministry, but it was harder to get friends along to hear someone like that because people didn't know them. And actually in Australia, it's all about trust. And so it then shifted to relational evangelism because that's how people trusted. And so, I actually am, the churches that I visit, I've had to stop using the language of gifted evangelists because no one knows if they are. What I say is, do you have a heart for outreach and helping people to come to faith? And in some ways that should be all our heart, but there's definitely some people who just are driven by that, and it seems to be a gifting. Yeah.
Our opportunity today to talk about maybe lots of dimensions and the factors that we might be thinking of when we, contemplate a great commission and making disciples of nations and things like that. If I'm asking you, where do you think we are at in Australia? Are we winning? Are we losing? Or are we just sort of somehow rather stagnant? Where do you think we sit? And I'm being very general here, across Christians across the nation.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in changing times at the moment. And so I think we probably were, I hate to say the word losing, but it's sort of, we were definitely on the decline. And partly, it just culturally, we were sort of hammered from the new atheists and, the LGBTI stuff. It was definitely, we were hammered reputationally, and you just had to work harder to, talk about Jesus, I guess. But actually, I think things seem to be changing. Like, I just got a message yesterday and a minister said, we've just had all these people become Christians. And that seems to be the comments that I'm getting at the moment, but through nothing from us, if that makes sense. I feel like we haven't done that much differently, but actually God's doing something. So, I'm pretty excited to see where we end up around. And it's around the world. Like, that sort of seems to be the general thing about what people are saying.
People are talking about a certain lightness and a certain change, and some are drawing attention to even a Donald Trump factor and some of the things that, are aligned with what he calls common sense. And, what we want to actually see where God is in all of that. But is there a Trump factor at work, do you think, that's caused a little bit of a lightness and people are feeling a lot more free to be able to talk about their faith without getting cancelled?
I would have said things like Jordan Peterson and that sort of movement in terms of trying to work out that there's something transcendent, that actually just doing the material is not satisfying. And I think that was the thing around the new atheist movement, is that it was a belief about nothing, but it gave nothing. And so there's people who are like Ayan Ali Hersey, she's just come out of the whole Islam, then atheism, and now has become a Christian. And so a lot of her stuff is around, actually, we need something more than what atheism offers. And I think there's a longing to me that you're seeing for something more transcendent, that you're connected into something bigger. Yeah.
Wonderful insight to talk about what we might even say are celebrity conversions and people who are not like, the rest of us maybe, who grapple with some of these things, but we don't always hit the mark in being able to explain things and articulate the way that some people like a Jordan Peterson or an Ayan Hersey Ali or lots of other of those celebrity conversions. We call them celebrities, but they're intelligent people. We can say that, they're intelligent people. So intelligent people give us confidence that what we are actually saying to our friends has weight. Is that something, do you think, that we can point to?
Well, actually, what I say to people is listen to how they explain things, because when we lost having gifted evangelists up front, they often gave us the language on how to speak about things. And so part of it is, how do you find the people to help us to talk about sort of issues that are going on? How do we talk about that in our everyday life? And so that's often with church planting movements as well, is that they've been so good at translating the language and helping us, the everyday Christian, to really be able to talk about our faith in a beautiful way. And I think that was the thing with Tim Keller. He just really spoke about faith Jesus in such a beautiful way that actually gave us confidence in language on how to speak about it. So, yeah, to me, it's just listen and hear how they speak about things.
You've mentioned Timothy Keller, and there's a connection there because the City-to-City Asia Pacific is part of the Redeemer City-to-City in New York City, and that's the connection there to Timothy Keller. He's made a major impact, hasn't he?
Well, how City to City started was quite a lot of people were asking, well, how do you reach a whole city? And so he put together and actually eventuated into a book called Centre Church, which a lot of people have read. And he produced some material, some principles, I guess, on how do you really reach a city. And City to City Asia Pacific oversees us at City to City Australia. And what we've been trying to think about is, if you're a church that's flourishing, can you church plant? If you're a church that is stagnant or in decline, can you revitalise? And also, how do you do city movement? So how do you actually work together as a city or a local government area, or in Perth they call them geo-networks? How can you actually work together to reach a city in all aspects of life? And he just was beautiful in the way that he talked not just about conversion, but also the arts and just the healthiness of a city and how you look after the poor. What contribution can we make as churches?
Interesting that New York City, much bigger than any of our capital cities, we might be thinking when we're talking cities about our capital cities, but what about regional cities in all of that? Because there's lots of regional cities throughout Australia. Do the same sort of principles, do you think, apply to the biggest cities as they do to the medium size and the smaller cities?
Well, actually, even just reaching a whole big city like Melbourne, you've got to break it up into, and we break it up into local government areas, because it just feels overwhelming if you think about the whole of Melbourne City. So actually, it's got to be a small enough group that you know enough people and know enough of the ministers to be able to really think and work towards your area. So actually, country church is actually amazing because they have a bit more of a contained area. They often know each other already, and they could, working out how to actually work together is such a beautiful thing.
The leaders in country churches know how to relate together, and they have a strategy to reach their town. The cities are the ones a little confused. There's lots more for us to talk about. Julianne Laird.
I'm not sure if I was quite saying that. Anyway.
Well, we can unpack some more in just a short while, but Julianne Laird is Director of Missional Engagement for City to City Australia, citytocityaustralia.org.au if you want to get an idea where Julianne is coming from while we're having our conversation. Much more to come right here on 2020.
Helping you make sense of life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision Christian Radio.
And our special guest this hour is Julianne Laird. Julianne is the Director of Missional Engagement for City to City Australia, and we're checking the pulse of what things are happening, what things are like here in Australia around evangelism and expansion efforts, planting of churches and the like. And maybe you've been exposed to some of those sorts of ideas even in the January of this year. And here we are into February already, and you might be thinking, well, our church leaders are trying to move in a particular direction. Well, you might like to join into our conversation on 1800 316 316. If you have a question or a comment, you might even like to give your impression about where things are going. Are we winning? Are we losing? Are we just stagnant? What's happening here in Australia? Well, you might be able to even give your feedback to our special guest today. Our special guest is Julianne Laird. She's Director of Missional Engagement for City to City Australia. Julianne, let's talk some more about cities. And we don't want to leave people in the country out of our conversation, but people in the cities. This is the estimate here. By 2050, the number of people living in cities will exceed 75%. So we're at 50% now, 75%'s coming. So no wonder there's a bit of a focus on cities.
Yeah. Well, Tim Keller definitely has a theology around that. And we do often get asked, what about country towns? We love country towns, but Tim Keller's point was that actually how a culture is often shaped is through cities, and partly it's just the volume of people and the sort of thinking about things. And I probably would like it if it was a bit of a push from the other way as well in terms of country towns pushing back into the city. But it's definitely something we need to think about, and something that is, we do need to spend some time in terms of how do we reach cities. Yeah.
And we're moving away in our conversation today from the idea that it's just an evangelist who arrives and has an event and makes a proclamation of the gospel and people respond, even though I'm sure that's not going to die out. Let's bring into this conversation the dimension here that talks about church planting. Because is this one of the keys that we have to grapple with to be able to say this is the way we move forward in reaching our cities?
So I would say it's always a both and. Like you always need, it's always good to have public evangelists. It's always good to do church planting. You need a good ecosystem of a few things going on. You need Christians who've got great friends who aren't Christians, and you need good equipping. Like there's a whole range of things that I think it would be really great if it was just one thing that meant that we could solve all of this. Well, the one thing is actually God's Spirit. But it's you always need a few things going on. Yeah.
You mentioned in our opening segment the terminology that those leaders around the world are using, and maybe it's more than just terminology, but even the way the culture is changing, the way we think about family, the way we think about careers, all of these sorts of things. The local church, in the way we're all on the same page with these, is this an important element here when you're planting a new church? There's a new way of talking, a new way of speaking, a new way of reaching out?
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, because as I've gone around, I've been actually pretty impressed with the local churches. Like, you just meet such quality and amazing people in the local church. And I know there's sort of I feel like we haven't given the local church enough of a celebration, because you just go around and there's these ministers who are trying their best and really just loving the people, and there's often really mature Christians in local churches, and they reflect often the community that they're in. And I just feel like people have a real love for their community. They might not know how to go forward, so part of what I've been doing is trying to equip and train people in terms of moving outwards. But I've been really thrilled with the local church and what a good and healthy space I feel like they're in. So I do want to celebrate the local church.
You've got leaders, and they might be called pastor, they might be called priest. They've come to ministry with a calling on their life. Sometimes it's around evangelism. It's always got that discipleship focus to it somewhere there, but there are certain gifts and there are certain directions and things that leaders take. Sometimes there's a disconnect between the leader and the people in the pews. I wonder if you've got any thoughts here, because if you're going to unleash a whole new church planting phenomenon, the people in the pews have to be on the same page as the leader, don't they?
Yeah, and what I'm finding is a lot of people are. So a lot of local people just have a heart for evangelism. They're just a bit stuck. and maybe a church plant is the way forward, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's actually working together with other churches. So for each church, it's working out, and with each community, it's working out what is the right thing. So one of our local new developments ended up having like about 17 churches now. Well, it probably wasn't that many, but it was an overwhelming amount of church plants, and it was actually too many for the amount of people who are moving into the area, and it was a bit slower than people thought it was going to be. So part of it is working together, and we really tried hard actually in the northern parts of Melbourne. Okay, let's all actually work together. There's all these different areas that are opening up. Can a few people go here? Can a few people go here? So it was actually more trying to be coordinated together in terms of how we reach forward. Although I haven't really answered your question, and I'm really sorry.
That's all right.
Sidetracked.
We've got plenty more time to talk. Hey, let me ask you something important here, because when you are a part of a local church and you realise that the way forward is going to be to plant a church, do people plant like micro churches? Or are you hiving off a third of the congregation and they all go off and start in a whole new building? Is it the home group focus that starts this? Give us your thoughts here on if you're a part of a church and you're thinking, well, it makes sense to talk about church planting, but how does it look best for our church?
Yeah, and I think that's the question. How does it look best for our church? So if you do the home group style or the micro church, like there's low cost for that. So they don't have to have a certain amount of money to then be able to pay a pastor. So there's pros and cons for each. Part of it also is around buildings, like where are the buildings, where do we meet? So if we become bigger than a micro church, do we then do more micro churches, or do we want to stay together and we become something bigger? So there's a few factors, and I'm not fast. Let's just do it. And so, whatever works for you as a church and whatever works for your people. And partly it's just seeing what evolves. And there's so many different models. It's sort of wonderful.
Do you think you can talk about this forever, but it's going to take someone, and maybe they've become a little unsettled in the nest, or however that looks, to actually break free and say, we're going to do this? It's going to take some level of leadership, as sometimes there'll be pastors who've got their eye on people in their congregation, knowing they've got the skills and everything it takes to go and do that church plant, but there's a little disconnect still. I mean, is there some point, a tipping point, where you break free and you go, we're going to do this?
I wouldn't have said it was break free, but what I would say is, get behind people who have that real love and desire. And we really just are praying that more people will step out into that space. And, you do want to have the ministry team and the everyday Christian, you want to have them working together, because you do want people to be behind you to support you in that. And part of it is, and Exponential's been really good at this, is trying to change the landscape so that ministry teams do have that church planting mindset. So they've been coordinating or gathering all the different church planting organisations around Australia to try and lift the temperature around church planting, so that we have each person in the pew and every ministry team just really thinking about how can we do church planting. But some churches definitely are not at that point, and they've got to really do the turnaround of really using the church planting skills that you need to go out to actually revitalise their church.
Julianne, let's come back to some of the really important points that you began to make in our first part of our conversation. The thought of raising the temperature of evangelism in our local church. For some people, they're just at church on Sunday, and for the other 6 days, the temperature's pretty low. In some ways here, it's like including everybody in the mission to actually plant a church or raise the temperature of evangelism. How do you go about raising the temperature, do you think?
Yeah, there's a few things to think about. So there's the everyday Christians, there's the people with a real heart for outreach, and then there's the ministry teams on how a church is structured, And what I often say is with evangelism, you've just got to have the foot on the accelerator to keep that momentum going. And, it's hard when people haven't seen someone become a Christian for a while. So I just say, let's get praying. Like, that's the first sort of thing as a church. Individuals, like, how can we be praying for our city or our community? And I just feel like, wow, if we were all praying around Australia for people to come to faith, what might God do? So part of it is equipping the everyday Christian to feel comfortable and confident in relationships and to be, have their faith fairly integrated into their everyday life. And to be, I think, the culture shifting. And so hopefully we can actually be more open about our faith. And I think that creates tensions for people. If you're open about your faith, you're living it out, and people will see that difference. And then for people who might have a real heart for outreach, how do we really equip them to have a love for their local church? And how do we help them really use potentially a gift that they might have? And what's a way that we can train and equip up people who have that real heart? So some people just have that just desire and really move forward. Sometimes, they might do it in a sort of awkward, too hard way. So it's really trying to help people in that phase. And then the third group is ministry teams, because sometimes we can do things as a church that actually doesn't help with evangelism. So I often say to ministers, just even recognizing that there could be someone who's not a Christian in your service, like that's just a 101 sort of thing. There might not be, but actually what you're doing is you're helping people see, actually, if someone comes to church, they will be addressed and connected. And in fact, like I gave an evangelistic talk at a church yesterday, and there was somebody just randomly walked in, and him and I had eye contact the whole way through, and as you could see, he was really just open, and it was just sort of fabulous.
And is there a sense in which this is something God does, almost like revival, Holy Spirit-led atmosphere, when people are so open to the gospel? Sometimes we feel like that openness is something we have to artificially, or we just have to create that sort of openness in the conversations we have. It just led me to thinking about, when you're saying you've got to learn to love your local church. Yeah. Sometimes I hear people talking and they're saying less than loving things about their local church, or less than loving things about their pastor, or they've got a criticism of the music team or the youth pastor, or, is there something in the way we talk about the local church that helps everybody else fall in love with it?
Yeah, I think part of it is in our discipleship as Christians, actually being with a group of people who are just very different. And I think sometimes we do look for churches where we're similar, but there's something beautiful about the local church where everyone's very different, and there's sort of learning you've got to get, it's like it takes off our sharp edges when we actually are with people that are quite different. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the local church is it's more than anything that you see in any community is it's a group of people who are just quite different, older, younger, or like left and right. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just so many differences that we have, but we're really united by Jesus. And I consider it a bit like, an awkward family Christmas where you just go, oh, man, we've got some weirdo family members. Not in my family, I better say. But, you just learn to live with each other, and there's something beautiful about that discipleship model of actually going and attending a local church. I still feel like I didn't answer your question.
Well, no. It's great to just be talking about these things. Yeah. How we talk about our local church, I mean, that just brings us into just controlling the things that we say, and perhaps holding back from passing on that gossip, or, well, I didn't really feel like the pastor hit the mark this morning, but I think I'll hold my tongue, and I'll be supportive of the initiatives that the church is involved in. Hey, let's talk.
I do want to go back to the Spirit at work. So part of it is, as you go to a local church, is what is God saying to me, and being open to, even through the music, whether it's good or bad, whether it's through the sermon, whether it's good or bad, God can still work in that. And you have the option mostly to go to another church if it's not satisfying, but mostly most churches I find are quite similar around Australia, and there's just a real lot of love for each other. And when you get that element, I think that's just a really beautiful thing. But that's the Spirit at work in us. Yeah.
You identify those loving elements, and hopefully they're bigger than the elements where you can pick out some, some deficiencies. And to recognise too, that actually I need the local church. I need to be there because my own maturity and discipleship depends on the people that I'm rubbing shoulders with, doesn't it, on a Sunday, or whether I get together with them at a small group through the week. I actually need the local church, so good if I love the local church. Hey, let's talk some more about getting more outward looking, because you can become insular, you can be inward focused. Looking outward, sometimes that might take a little sacrifice. What are your thoughts here on manoeuvring your own thoughts to look out instead of in?
Yeah, I think that is our natural inclination to start looking inwards. And it's partly because you just get along with people and you've got very similar values and all that sort of stuff. I think it does take a bit of effort to be able to be looking outwards. And part of that is once you are praying. So that I do want to emphasize the praying bit, because once you start praying and looking for opportunities and seeing what God's doing is really what I try and say. God's already doing stuff in people's life. You just get in on what he's doing already. The problem is we can't always see what God's doing. So part of it's persevering and loving people over the long term. And you don't know when his Spirit's going to do something in people. So part of it's just journeying with people over the long term and not being disheartened. I often say that it sort of takes a while for my friends to come to faith, and it's just them knowing everything about you. I am pretty open. But yes, them seeing how God's Spirit is working in my life and how the scriptures, shape you and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Julianne, come back to, what we began to talk about, checking the pulse of Australian churches, the thought of the expansion moves. And when we've settled on the idea that, your most effective expansion could be through the planting of a new church. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of planning, a little bit of process in all of that. You mentioned that you have some processes that you've been working with. Are those easily accessible by listeners to our conversation today, that you say, well, I've got a bit of an idea about a new church for our community, but what process would I take? What sort of hints can you give us?
Yeah, well, actually, Reading Centre Church is a good one in terms of thinking about how you go about setting up a church. So that's a good one. So what does church actually mean? There's also lots of different organisations. City to City is actually just one of many who are thinking about and trying to help denominations move forward with church planting. So that's accessible and available, and Exponential gathers all those people at a conference in August, and so you get to meet lots of different people at that. Part of it is just working with the minister about what's possible as well. So just thinking about the areas that are around you. It might be that it's saturated with churches in the areas that are around you, so how can we actually grow our own church together? Or it might be that there's just all these new builds, or there's a lot of older churches and not much going on. So part of it's really knowing the area as well in terms of what's needed.
Okay, what about the challenges that a church might face? You say to the pastor, well, I'm excited about our leadership team talking about planting a church, and then the pastor says, well, if only we had our mortgage under control and, if we could see some growth happening in our church, maybe then we could think about church planting as like an optional extra. I wonder if you've got any thoughts around when the appropriate and right time might be to be contemplating a church, because if you jump out on a limb and it all fails because you didn't count the cost, you might be actually doing the wrong thing. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, that's a really good point you're making. It sort of depends on the model. So if you are going and you're losing 30% of your people to go and start up a church plant, that actually is quite a sacrifice. And so you do need to be taking that seriously and, working towards that. I think the thing is, can we as churches have a real kingdom mindset or a region mindset so that actually it will be costly? That's the sort of point of it, is that it will be costly. It'll be costly financially, it'll be costly numbers-wise. And I think that's okay. That's just what discipleship's about. It's costly, but for all of us, it's thinking about what sacrifices can we all make for the kingdom in terms of, we want people to come to faith. If church planting is a way that we can help more people come to faith, is that a cost worth giving towards? Yeah.
And every single church is going to have its unique position.
Yes.
And I imagine that's where being prayerful around these things are going to invite God's wisdom into decision-making about these things.
Yeah.
Let me ask you the toughest question.
Oh, gosh.
How many new churches do we need in Australia?
Well, it depends on how you do your numbers. So I used to be the canon for church planting for the Diocese of Melbourne, and we worked on one Anglican church for every 100,000 people. So if you do the numbers, you actually only need 60 churches in the whole of Melbourne, and I think we have around 200.
Okay. Okay, Melbourne is over-churched. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you're counting on other denominations being there. I think 100,000 is too little. I would say you'd need more than that in terms of if you're thinking local. And it's interesting, there are two different models of churches. There's the draw in from everywhere church, and then there's the real local church. And local church, you do evangelism locally, whereas if you have a sort of citywide church, you do it attractionally. And so you just do evangelism differently. And so, it's realizing that we've got sometimes different approaches.
And isn't it exciting to think about process and crunching some numbers? And this is what you've been able to be involved in when you say, one Anglican church per 100,000 people. Well, if everybody turned up for church on Sunday, there'd be 100,000 there. But we know that's not going to be the case. But that might mean that you do the numbers in such a way as it suits the setting that you're in, whether it's your country town, your regional city, your capital city. One church per 100,000 might become one per 50, become one per 20,000, one per 10,000.
That's right.
This is the sort of thing that gives you that real momentum for expansion.
Yeah.
Imagine if every church in Australia had the thought, we're going to plant a church. What would that look like, do you think?
Yeah. Oh, well, that would be amazing. Because it would actually shift you as a church in terms of culturally. If you're all thinking about, if we are going to plant a church, what do we need to do to get to that point? I just think that's an amazing sort of thing as a church culturally. And there's a healthiness to that because you're thinking outward and you're heading outward, all your finances take different priorities. And I just think there's a healthiness to that. Whether it happens or not, there's just something good about that process.
Some might be thinking, okay, well, if the local church can stump up a six-figure income, I might be interested in getting out there and planting a church. I think I could hear you have a bit of a laugh about that because the thought of the biblical idea of tent making, the fact that you have a business or a career and what you do on the side, it's your side hustle is actually to go and plant the church and grow the kingdom. Do you think this is where the future is headed? I mean, how do you think, if you're going to plant so many churches that we'll need in Australia, do you think tent making is one of those things that has to be part of our mindsets?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It's hard to do because you're working as well as starting a church. But if that was possible, there's just so many more opportunities for that. A lot of the charismatic churches really work hard at this, but you see that tension in that, this takes up time and energy from family, all that sort of stuff. So it is costly.
Does a new local church plant even need an employed leader, an employed pastor? What, in your experience, works best?
I'd have to get my colleague Chris Swan to answer this. Maybe you could get him to answer a lot of this. It's not my area in terms of specialty. I actually don't even know how to answer that one, so I might leave that to Chris.
I guess if you're going to plant a church, your aspiration is going to be that eventually you'll be able to afford to have a pastor, because there are a lot of a minister, because there are a lot of administrative regulations and expectations for being a part of all sorts of conferences and commissions and involved in all sorts of leadership training. That's where you actually do want to go, because you need that maturity of that leader in that church. So right from the very beginning, somehow or other, you've got to have that aspiration, haven't you?
Yes and no. So, I hear that. Like, there is something around, we do spend in denominations quite a bit of time training and equipping and maturing leaders. And yet there's the pace of not doing that can be a lot faster. So I think there is a tension in between both of those. And there's safety issues, there's insurance issues. Like, if you gather people in a church, like in a home, what does that mean, and the implications of that? I think there's complications and there's pros and cons, I think, for both.
And of course, you could say that those complications get a whole lot easier when you are denominationally connected, because often denominations will have a head office that looks after a lot of those sorts of things. And yes, you've got to administer those locally, but sometimes the best advice is there because you are connected to a wider denomination. Hey, just a few minutes involved for our conversation, Julianne. Just thinking of the Apostle Paul, who went to, take the gospel to the Gentile world. First, he went to the cities. I'll get your thoughts there. And the second thing is he actually planted churches in those cities. Those sorts of biblical models, they are the formation of the models we have for today, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, well, definitely in terms of going where the people are at, speaking their language. Like, that's another great thing that Paul does, is he connects really well, understands them, helps them move forward, introduces them to Jesus in a beautiful way. Like, he just is so amazing. And it's just wonderful to see his heart and his drive to really help people come to faith, and just that their lives are transformed. Yeah. It's amazing. Okay,
when people go to the City to City Australia website today, citytocityaustralia.org.au, what are they going to find there? What sort of resource? I mean, is visiting the website today going to give you that extra spark that says this is what we need to do in our community?
Yeah, I hope so. So the three things that we do are church planning, revitalisation and movement. And so part of it is working out, what do you need a hand with? So if you want a hand with church planning, and we have a great team who think about that. If you want to do revitalisation, like to turn around, really get your evangelism temperature up, there's a team that helps you with that. And then there's the movement, which is how do you help churches work together to reach a local government area, a town or a city. So 3 of those areas you can get quite a bit of help in. We do quite a bit of training and really trying to gather people together around how to move outwards. Yeah.
Well, wonderful insights today, Julianne, and I'll point listeners to that website, citytocityaustralia.org.au. And even if you don't visit the websites, just be mindful that there are people like Julianne, who is, a mover and shaker behind the scenes, loves to talk at church camps, as I understand it, Julianne. So I'll just,
that.
So to connect with Julianne, do so through the City to City Australia website. You can also check out the lasan.org website.
Yes.
Is there any other?
Yeah.
I mentioned you've got a finger in every pie just about. So where else can people connect with you, Julianne?
So definitely if you want to check out the lasan.org, if you do /report, there's a global report around how we're going with evangelism, and there's amazing data there. And we've also done an Oceania report, so evaluating what's been going on here around Oceania. So, please get onto that. It's helpful. And the stuff that I do in City to City is called Ripple Effect. So if you want to connect in, there's a whole thing around Ripple Effect, and you can find that and connect with me there as well.
Wonderful. And you know what? In a conversation like this today, we can only just scratch the surface. But there are going to be some listeners who are saying, let me just take this a little deeper. Let me get some research and take this to our leadership team at church. And as you say, there's those global reports on evangelism, and that comes down to our region. And Lasan very interested in just how to win the whole world, which is just an amazing thing. So you can go to that lasan.org/port to get that global report.
Report.
Yes, a report. For the global report on evangelism, citytocityaustralia.org.au, and connect with Julianne. She's leading that initiative called Ripple Effect. Julianne Laird is Director of Missional Engagement for City to City Australia. Julianne, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today on 2020.
Thank you so much. It's been a really great interview. Well done.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.